The crystal glass shattered across the floor of the luxurious office, the sound of glass hitting marble echoing coldly, like mockery in the air. Ethan Hale didn't blink. He just stood there, watching the red wine spread into a distorted circle, like a wound that had just closed, torn open again. On the computer screen in front of him, the headline still glowed. "You're cordially invited to celebrate our wedding, Clara and Daniel." 2 years. 2 years since she'd left him in the middle of the biggest collapse of his life, to run off with a more stable man. And now she had sent a wedding invitation to his work inbox. Public, detached, perfectly Clara Weston. Elegance sharpened into cruelty. Ethan's lips curved slightly, a smile half contempt, half the effort to hold back madness. "A wedding invite or a taunt?" he muttered, his voice low and sharp like a blade grazing glass. The door swung open. Miles Bennett, best friend, business partner, and the only man who dared walk into Ethan's office without knocking, poked his head in. "Heard thunder in here. Should I start running?" he said with a hint of humor. Ethan didn't answer. He just tossed the mouse onto the desk, letting the computer screen spin the digital wedding card, golden letters gleaming against an ivory background. "Together, forever." Miles let out a low whistle. "You're right. This is a taunt. Classic Clara. Always knew how to hit where it hurts." Ethan took a deep breath, arms crossed. "She knows I'd read it, and she wants me to feel small, like I still haven't moved on." Miles leaned on the desk, tilting his head. "And have you?" Ethan stayed silent. The neon light reflected in his eyes, cold, unreadable. Outside, Manhattan drowned in a metallic sunset. Glass towers glowed gold, mirroring the image of a successful man, but the reflection staring back at him was empty. Miles gave a quiet chuckle, breaking the heavy air. "Listen, if you're going to that wedding, at least don't show up alone, like some post-breakup glitch." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying, take someone. Someone who will make Clara ask herself, 'What did I lose?'" Miles shrugged. "Don't just show up. Make it a scene she'll never forget." Ethan turned to Miles, staring at him as if a bolt of lightning had just struck his mind. "Someone who will throw her off balance. Someone her world would never accept." "Sounds dangerous," Miles said with a grin, "but also kinda thrilling." Ethan didn't respond. He walked over to the massive window, gazing down at the crowded streets below. Streams of cars and people pulsed through the city like veins of light. Amid the glittering chaos, everything he'd chased, fame, money, power, suddenly felt hollow. All that remained was a long, gnawing emptiness. A light rain began to fall, blurring the city's glow. Down at the corner, near a subway entrance, he saw a woman sitting curled up beneath the awning of a convenience store. No sign asking for help. No hand reaching out. She just sat there, head slightly raised, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her eyes following the passing crowd. Calm, almost serene. Ethan kept looking down longer than he meant to. He didn't know why that woman's gaze unsettled him. Only that he couldn't look away. Miles was still talking behind him, something about the firm, a new project, but the words blurred into nothing. All that remained was the image of the woman in the rain, silent, yet somehow proud. A gust of wind hit, splattering rain against the glass. Ethan let out a low, crooked laugh, the kind that teetered on the edge of madness. "If she wants to see me broken," he murmured, "I'll show her the opposite." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Care to share what's going through that dangerous mind of yours?" Ethan turned, slipping on his suit jacket, buttoning it as he spoke, each word dropping heavy against the marble floor. "I'm going to that wedding." Miles snorted. "Good. And who's your plus one?" Ethan didn't blink. "Someone Clara Weston would never dare sit next to." Miles's eyes widened. "This is starting to sound like a Netflix revenge plot. Where exactly do you plan to find someone like that?" Ethan walked out of the office without looking back. The streets of New York are full of people Clara's world pretends not to see. The elevator doors slid shut, the light reflecting his face, cold, determined, yet with a flicker of curiosity deep in his eyes. Wind rushed across Union Square as the rain grew heavier. Ethan walked slowly along the sidewalk, not knowing what he was searching for, only that some strange pull was guiding him forward. A taxi splashed water across his suit as it sped by. He didn't care. Everything around him seemed to fade into silence until he stopped, right under the awning by the subway entrance where she was sitting. The woman looked up. Their eyes met. There was no fear, no plea for help. Just a sharp, steady gaze, as if she were sizing him up. In that moment, Ethan felt his heart stall, not out of pity, but because of something deeper, something he couldn't name. A strange intuition that she was about to change the entire story he was about to write. He didn't know why he took a step toward her, only that her eyes had made it impossible to walk away. The rain kept falling in a steady drizzle as Ethan stopped under the subway awning. The woman remained seated as if the rain had nothing to do with her. He stood there for a few seconds, hands in his coat pockets, watching her in silence. She lifted her head, eyes without fear or curiosity, only a faint hint of mockery. "You filming some charity TikTok?" Her voice was hoarse, low and sharp enough to stop Ethan in his tracks. He hadn't heard a voice like that in a long time, the voice of someone who once knew power, who had tasted bitterness, but still kept a rare sliver of dignity. He smiled faintly. "No, I just thought you could use some help." She gave a thin laugh, her gaze flicking to the expensive watch on his wrist. "So you can feel like a better person?" Ethan stayed silent. The rain fell harder. She pulled an old handkerchief from her coat pocket, slowly wiped her face, then looked straight at him. "Honestly, I've seen people like you. They stop for 3 minutes, ask a few humanitarian questions, then go have dinner at a Michelin-starred place. So if that's what you're planning, leave before I get annoyed." Ethan chuckled softly, not quite sure why he felt intrigued. "My name's Ethan Hale." "And am I supposed to be impressed?" she replied evenly. "No, I just have a proposition." "A proposition?" He studied her closely. "I need a companion. Just for one night, I'll pay you $10,000. She tilted her head slightly, dark eyes glinting with sarcasm. "Are you buying company? Or attention?" Ethan froze for a second. The question hit something he'd never bothered to ask himself. Through the rain, he could only hear his heartbeat, a little off rhythm. The woman, Isla, gave a thin, knowing smile that wasn't pleasant. "I'm guessing both, and I'm not cheap." He answered calmly, "Neither am I." She stared at him for a few more seconds, as if weighing his words, then stood. Her thin coat was soaked through, drops falling onto the pavement. "All right, I'm curious to see where you plan to take me, and even more curious why a man who has everything is standing in the rain talking to someone who has nothing." Ethan said nothing, just gave a slight nod toward the car parked across the street. When she stepped inside, the driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then quickly looked away. Ela sat by the window, eyes following the blurred streaks of city lights. No fear. No awkwardness, just quiet observation. "You're not going to ask where I'm taking you?" Ethan said. "You look like a man who enjoys surprises. I wouldn't want to ruin the fun." "Take a guess." "A fancy place," she replied dryly, "where people pretend to be polite while judging each other by the price of their watches." Ethan glanced at her. "You seem to know that world well." She shrugged. "I used to live close to it. Then one day I realized I was standing outside the door." The car stopped in front of an upscale boutique hotel in Midtown. A valet rushed over, opening the door with a polite bow. Isla stepped out, wet, cold, but with an unmistakable pride in her gaze. As Ethan led her through the lobby, every head turned, a man in a tailored suit walking beside a woman in a worn, threadbare coat. The air seemed to tighten with discomfort, but Ela didn't care in the slightest. "What do you want me to turn into?" she asked, her tone laced with playful challenge. "Nothing," Ethan replied. "Just yourself, in a new dress." She gave a soft laugh. "That sounds both terrifying and oddly intriguing." Ethan guided her into the high-end fashion boutique inside the hotel. The stylist nearly froze when they walked in. "Mr. Hale, and your guest?" Ethan simply said. "She needs a complete transformation." The stylist swallowed hard. "Of course, sir." Isla sat down in the chair, loosening her tangled hair. The stylist trimmed through the strands, golden light falling across her face, revealing delicate, striking features. The chosen dress, navy blue, simple and timeless, hugged her frame with quiet elegance. When the final touch of makeup was done, Ela opened her eyes. The woman in the mirror was no longer the drifter from the rain. She was someone who once knew exactly how to command a room with a single glance. Ethan stood behind her, speechless. He'd met women more beautiful, more perfect, but none who made him forget to breathe like this. It wasn't her looks, it was her presence, something that radiated from her eyes, not her clothes. She turned, catching him staring. "Do I look all right?" "You?" He started to say beautiful, but she cut in smoothly. "Don't say that. That's what men say when they don't know what to do with their feelings." Ethan chuckled softly, the first real smile of the night. "Then what should I say?" She looked back at the mirror, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Say you're surprised, because I used to be a lot more familiar with this world than you think." Their eyes met in the mirror. In that elegant room, everything seemed to fall silent for a beat. Ethan didn't fully understand her words, but in her voice lingered the scent of a past he'd never touched, and perhaps was about to be pulled into. The black limousine rolled to a stop in front of the mansion, hosting what everyone called the wedding of the year. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, gowns and tuxedos shimmering under the golden dusk. When the car door opened, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isla stepped out first, the navy dress catching the last light of day, her short hair framing her face, her gaze calm and unshaken. Ethan followed, fastening his cuff and resting a hand on her back with an easy familiarity, as if they'd known each other for years. Every lens turned toward them. "Who's with Ethan Hale? Who is she? New model, maybe?" The whispers overlapped, thick with curiosity. Isla didn't glance around. She just smiled faintly and walked the white carpet at an unhurried pace, as if every stare, every flash, every whisper was exactly where it belonged. Clara Weston appeared at the entrance, draped in a white gown laced with gold, every inch of her posture perfectly calculated for the cameras. But the moment she saw Ethan walk in with the unfamiliar woman beside him, she froze, just for half a second. Her expression remained flawless, but her eyes flickered with surprise. Daniel, her soon-to-be husband, didn't notice. Ethan did. He met Clara's gaze and gave a faint, polite smile, just cold enough to leave her no room to react. Isla tilted her head slightly, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "She noticed you before she even saw her groom." Ethan exhaled a thin breath. "And you noticed that before I did." Isla's lips curved into a subtle smile as she stepped a little closer. As they approached the bride and groom, Clara tried to keep her voice soft and graceful. "Ethan, what a surprise to see you here." And her eyes swept Ela from head to toe, with quite an impressive guest. Ela extended her hand, her tone light but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Oh, it's lovely to finally meet someone who's been talked about so much." The words sliced through the air like a thin blade. A few guests exchanged looks. Some tried to hide their smirks. Clara hesitated, then let out a delicate laugh. "Sounds like I should be flattered by my reputation." Ela gave a small shrug. "Fame doesn't always take effort. Sometimes it just depends on who's telling the story." Ethan gently squeezed Isla's hand, a subtle signal to ease up, though in his eyes flickered a mix of surprise and unmistakable amusement. The party unfolded in a vast garden, golden lights strung through the trees like a dream. Isla blended into the crowd as if she had been born for it. She chatted effortlessly with an older group about Italian art, then drifted over to a table of tech investors, diving smoothly into a conversation about AI and venture capital. Whispers began to ripple through the guests. "Who is she? A collector, maybe? Could be some European billionaire's daughter?" Clara heard every word, each one pricking her pride like the tip of a needle. She turned to Daniel, forcing a smile. "Ethan still loves his little theatrics, doesn't he?" Daniel gave a half-hearted chuckle. "If he was aiming for attention, I'd say he nailed it." But Clara couldn't bring herself to laugh. Isla was unlike any woman Ethan had ever been seen with. She didn't try to seduce, didn't flaunt, didn't chase attention. She simply existed, and somehow, that was more powerful than anything else in the room. Ethan watched her from a distance. He realized Ela wasn't just intelligent, she had a way of making everyone around her believe she belonged there. When an older businesswoman said, "I'm sure I've seen you before. Was it at the Palm Springs Art Conference last year?" Isla simply smiled, her voice light as air. "Maybe in another life." The table laughed, even more intrigued than before. Ethan stood across the garden, wondering who she really was. The music shifted to a classical waltz. Ethan walked over and held out his hand. "Care to dance?" Isla glanced at his hand, then gave a small nod. As they stepped onto the floor, all eyes turned to them once again. Her movements were effortless, poised, graceful, every step perfectly measured. Ethan could feel it immediately. This wasn't the posture of someone who'd lived on the streets. "I thought you weren't used to parties like this," he murmured. Isla looked up, her eyes glinting with a mix of humor and challenge. "I never said that." He said nothing, but his hand tightened slightly around hers, unsure if it was curiosity or something far more dangerous. When the music ended, applause filled the garden. Isla dipped her head gracefully, then slipped away from Ethan and walked toward the bar. Clara stood nearby, her smile perfectly in place though her face had grown tight. As Isla passed, Clara leaned slightly closer, her tones sweet but edged with frost. "You know, it's impressive how someone can make such a strong impression in just one evening." Isla turned her head, her dark eyes catching the light, calm and razor-sharp. "Yes," she said softly, "as long as you know when to use your gaze." Clara blinked, not fully grasping the meaning, but the unease crawled up her throat all the same. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Ethan searched the garden for Isla. He found her standing alone beneath the trellis, a glass of champagne in her hand. He approached quietly, stopping beside her. "You managed to make the whole wedding talk about you without saying more than 3 sentences, he said. Isla took a slow sip, her voice low and steady. "People get curious when they see something they can't define." He studied her, his gaze deepening. "Who are you really?" She turned to him, a half-smile curving her lips, equal parts wistful and amused. "Someone you're still trying to forget. And someone Clara will never understand." Ethan didn't press further. The night breeze stirred, brushing the ribbons on her dress. And in that quiet moment, he realized he hadn't brought her here just to unsettle Clara. She was unsettling him, in ways he never saw coming. The morning after the wedding, Manhattan woke under the pale light of a night rain. Inside Ethan's high-rise apartment, the silence was so complete he could hear the ticking of the clock, each beat precise and hollow. He sat before his computer, the blue glow washing over his tired face. The report from the private investigator sat in his inbox, and the moment he opened it, his brow furrowed. No records exist under the name Isla Monroe. No birth certificate, no address, no education history, nothing. The name might as well have been pulled out of thin air. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Images of Isla in that navy dress, that calm, elusive smile at the wedding, spun through his mind. He hated this feeling, the mix of curiosity and loss of control. She had walked into his life like a mystery he hadn't asked for, and now he couldn't stop chasing it. Finally, he grabbed his phone and called the hotel front desk. "Is Miss Monroe still checked in?" "Yes, Mr. Hale. She asked not to be disturbed, but—" "Send her a message," he said, his voice steady but low. "Tell her I need to see her. Now." When Ethan knocked, the door opened almost instantly. Isla stood there, still herself, but stripped of last night's glamour. No makeup, hair tied back, a simple white shirt. Her eyes were clear, cool. "You're earlier than I expected," she said evenly, as if they were just resuming a paused conversation. "There's no record of you," Ethan said, stepping inside without hesitation. "No school, no address, no data. What are you hiding from me?" Isla leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. "You had someone follow me? You didn't leave me another choice. And you think Google can tell you who I am?" she asked, a faint, knowing smile curving her lips. "Some pasts, Ethan, aren't meant to be found online." Ethan said nothing, but his eyes never left her. Isla walked to the window, gazing down at the street below. "You really want to know who I am?" she asked quietly. "Yes, and why it feels like you didn't just stumble into my life by chance." She turned, the pale light from the window washing her face in muted gray. "I was Isla Monroe, daughter of Lucas Monroe, CEO of Monroe & Co." She paused for a moment. "The name you probably remember from the headlines when he jumped from the 22nd floor of his own building." Ethan froze. He remembered that story, one of the biggest financial scandals of its time, full of whispers about embezzlement, corruption, and a chain of bankruptcies that ruined thousands. "Monroe & Co," he said slowly. "They said your father stole from his investors." Isla let out a quiet laugh, soft, bitter. "They were half right. My father wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the only one. He trusted the wrong man." She held his gaze. That man was Clara Weston's father. Ethan stepped back, as if struck in the chest. Isla's voice didn't waver. "They were partners on a luxury housing project. My father discovered the Weston side was falsifying the financial records, funneling money through shell companies. When he threatened to expose them, the media suddenly got hold of leaked documents accusing him of the fraud. Within 2 weeks, everything collapsed. The stocks crashed. The company went bankrupt. My mother had a stroke. And then, she paused, her tone steady but her knuckles bone-white. He chose to end it. Ethan stood frozen. Inside his mind, fragments began to align. Clara's stories about the scandal that almost ruined my father, a treacherous business partner, and he had believed her. But now he saw it. It wasn't Weston who was destroyed. It was Monroe. You disappeared after that, he said quietly. Ela nodded. The media loves villains more than victims. No one cared about the truth. I lost everything. My home, my name, my place in the world. So I erased myself. Learned how to live the way people live when society decides they no longer exist. Ethan braced his hands on the desk, eyes fixed on the floor. And then you showed up at that subway station. It wasn't an accident, Ela said slowly. I knew about Clara's wedding. I just didn't expect you to be the one who'd invite me back into that world. He looked up, his voice low and rough. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start? Because you weren't honest either, she replied, her tone calm, almost gentle. You didn't come looking for me out of kindness, Ethan. You wanted to rattle Clara, didn't you? A faint smile curved her lips, the kind that left him without a defense. We were just using each other. You gave me a way back into the world that erased me. And I, she paused, eyes steady on his, gave you a way to face Clara without looking broken. He said nothing. Her words were so precise they cut. The only sound in the room was the wind whistling against the glass. Ela walked to the table, poured herself a glass of water, then continued, her voice calm but sharp. Clara Weston didn't just destroy my father. She took from you too, the last bit of faith you had in people. She looked up, meeting his eyes head on. We're both the products of the same sin, Ethan, their greed and their betrayal. Ethan stood there for a long moment, everything inside him tilting out of balance. It all connected now, cruelly, perfectly. The woman he once loved and the woman he'd just met, tangled in the same web of lies. What are you planning to do next? He asked quietly. Ela set the glass down, her voice steady and unwavering. I don't need you to take revenge for me. I just need you to let me stand in front of them, one last time, in the world they stole from me. Ethan looked at her, his eyes a mix of awe and disbelief. You're not afraid? Ela's smile was razor thin. Afraid? I've already lost everything. When there's nothing left to lose, all that remains is the truth. She walked to the door, pausing for just a heartbeat before leaving. You can think I'm dangerous. Maybe I am. But if you really want to know who Clara Weston is, look at her through the eyes of the person she destroyed. The door closed softly behind her. Ethan stood alone in the quiet room, frozen. For the first time in years, he didn't know what he'd been pulled into. Revenge, redemption, or something far more dangerous. All he knew was that, for the first time, he was shaken by a woman who didn't need saving. A week after their conversation at the hotel, Ethan received a gold-embossed invitation bearing a familiar logo. Women in Power, annual charity gala hosted by Clara Weston. He set it on the table, his gaze thoughtful, unreadable. Across from him, Ela held a cup of coffee, reading the elegant, raised lettering before letting out a quiet, cutting laugh. She's fast, Ela said. Barely married and already rebuilding her stage. Ethan studied her. You're going, aren't you? Of course, she replied without hesitation. I don't run from the place that buried me. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were steel. That evening, the Crystal Hall Hotel blazed with light from hundreds of spotlights. Guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns streamed across the red carpet. The press crowded tighter than ever. Everyone knew Clara Weston had become the face of a new kind of power. When Ethan and Ela arrived, the cameras erupted. Ela wore a sleek black gown, classic, understated, its daring cut drawing just enough attention without needing a single sparkle. Every step she took felt measured, deliberate, almost choreographed. How does it feel, Ethan murmured, coming back to this world? Ela tilted her head slightly, a faint smile curving her lips. Like returning to the scene of the crime, only this time with the evidence in hand. Inside the grand ballroom, Clara stood center stage, her face glowing under the lights. Tonight, she declared, we celebrate women who rose above adversity. Her gaze swept the room, then paused for a fraction of a second when it landed on Isla. A thin, almost disdainful smile crossed her lips. Isla returned it with a polite nod, so perfectly measured it felt like an insult. Ethan recognized that look. It was the signal. The storm was about to break. Midway through the gala, Clara approached, champagne flute in hand. It's admirable, really, she said softly, the smile not reaching her eyes, that you had the courage to show up. Though I'm afraid everyone will soon learn you're not quite who they think you are. Isla swirled her glass slowly, her tone light, unbothered. Oh, I'm curious which version of the story you're telling this time. Clara leaned closer, her whisper a blade. A story with proof, about how you conned a businessman for money, under a fake name. I'm sure the press will love it. Isla's lips curved, calm and cutting. Then I hope they'll enjoy the sequel just as much. Moments later, the sound of the microphone echoed through the hall. The host announced Clara's return to the stage to unveil a new initiative. Clara stepped up, iPad in hand, confidence radiating from every movement. Behind her, the massive screen flickered to life, showing images of Isla, grainy street camera footage, forged bank records, a trail of carefully planted lies. The crowd gasped. A ripple of murmurs spread like wildfire. What a shame, Clara said clearly, her tone smooth as glass. Even on a night meant to honor women of integrity, there are still those who choose to hide behind a mask. Ethan sat still, waiting for the perfect moment. As the murmurs swelled into a wave of gossip, he gave a subtle signal to the technician backstage. The giant screen blinked off, then flickered back to life. But this time it wasn't Isla's image. It was a series of financial records, real ones, stamped with Weston Corp, complete with dates, transaction IDs, and a trail of shady transfers. Gasps rippled through the room. Clara froze. Isla rose to her feet, her voice clear and steady. If we're talking about truth, she said, stepping forward, then let me finish the story. The lights followed her as she walked to the center of the hall, every eye turning. These numbers, she said, pointing to the screen, are proof that Weston Corp used fake investment funds to manipulate the market and framed Monroe & Co., my father's company, for their crimes. The room erupted. Shocked voices, camera flashes, the sudden chaos of a world watching its queen unravel. Clara froze, her smile still fixed, but her eyes empty, unfocused. She's lying. It's all fabricated. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and cutting through the chaos. Then what about the emails between you and the chairman of Silver Ridge Fund? The screen shifted again. A chain of messages appeared, the final line projected in bold, delete everything before Monday. The room went utterly silent. Then Ethan unlocked his phone and played an audio file. A trembling male voice filled the speakers, Clara's former associate, confessing that she had bribed him to forge documents and frame Monroe & Co. Clara screamed, "That's edited. It's fake." But no one was listening anymore. Reporters surged toward the stage, cameras flashing like lightning. 2 police officers entered through the side doors, moving straight toward her. One of them held up a warrant. "Clara Weston, you are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud and securities manipulation." The noise exploded. Gasps, shouts, chaos everywhere. Clara struggled against their hands, her eyes glistening with fury and panic. "Ethan," she cried. "You believe her? She destroyed both of us." Ethan looked at her, silent, steady, the weight of years in his voice when he finally spoke. "No, Clara, you destroyed yourself." As Clara was led away, Isla stood motionless. There was no triumph in her face, only slow, steady breathing and the quiet exhaustion in her eyes. Ethan approached her and said softly, "You did it." Isla shook her head. "No. The truth did. The press will handle the rest." Her voice was calm, but under the lights, her hands trembled faintly. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but before he could, she turned, picked up her small clutch from the table, and walked away. When he returned a few minutes later, after answering questions from the reporters, she was gone. On the chair where she had sat lay a folded note. "I don't need anyone to witness me getting back up." The handwriting was precise, unwavering. Ethan held the note in his hand, scanning the now half-empty ballroom. The lights still blazed, the background music played on, detached and hollow. Yet everything felt strangely vacant. He stood there beneath the glittering chandeliers, the reflection of the city lights in his eyes, quietly asking himself, Where did she go? A month had passed since the explosive night of the gala. News of Clara Weston had dominated the headlines, then slowly faded, like every scandal in the upper circles eventually did. But for Ethan, the echoes didn't fade so easily. One misty morning, he left Manhattan, carrying a single scrap of information, an address he'd overheard from a hotel clerk. She said she was heading west, to Portland. Portland greeted him with a gentle drizzle, the streets slick and glimmering beneath the soft glow of cafe lights. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. When Ethan pushed open the door to a small corner cafe, he saw her instantly. Isla sat by the window, a sketchbook open in front of her, a cup of coffee gone cold beside it. No evening gowns, no chandeliers, just a gray coat, her hair loosely tied, a few strands brushing her cheek. She was drawing. Clean, precise lines shaping rows of small houses pressed close together, the outline of a modest neighborhood slowly taking form. "I didn't think you'd find me," she said when she saw him, her voice calm, neither surprised nor defensive. "Wasn't easy," Ethan replied, pulling out the chair across from her. "I figured you'd choose somewhere louder." Isla gave a small shrug, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "After everything, I just wanted quiet. I'm redesigning affordable housing models for people who've lost everything, like I once did." Ethan glanced down at her sketches, his finger brushing the edge of the paper. "So you're starting over?" "Not exactly," she said softly. "I'm rebuilding what I lost, not a home, but trust." He was silent for a long moment, then placed a sealed envelope on the table. Ela looked at it, but didn't reach for it right away. "What's this?" "Permits and seed funding," he said quietly. "Enough to start the Monroe Foundation, a non-profit to build homes for the homeless." Ela looked up, her eyes caught between emotion and caution. "You didn't have to do this, Ethan. I don't want anyone's pity." He shook his head. "It's not pity. I'm not doing this because you need me. I'm doing it because I believe in you." They sat across from each other, the cafe window fogged with rain. Outside, people hurried by beneath umbrellas, but inside, time seemed to stand still. There were no confessions, no promises, only the quiet understanding of two people who had both walked through ruin and somehow found a reflection of themselves in each other. Isla finally opened the envelope, her fingers brushing the document inside. The top line read, "Founding partner, Isla Monroe." A rare, unguarded smile softened her face. "Monroe Foundation," she murmured. "My father would have liked the sound of that." On the phone screen, the news alert flashed. Clara Weston sentenced to 15 years in prison for financial fraud. Isla stared at it for a long time. She didn't smile. She only exhaled softly. "It's strange," she murmured. "When justice finally comes, it doesn't feel like relief. Just emptiness." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's because the real victory is when you no longer need revenge." The cafe door swung open, letting in a gust of wind mixed with rain and the faint jingle of a wind chime. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stepped inside, wearing a thin, worn coat. He hesitated near the counter, voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, is there anything to eat?" The owner shook his head, pointing to a small sign, "Closed kitchen." Isla stood up, reached into her bag, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. She knelt and placed it gently in the boy's hands. "Take it," she said softly. "You'll need a new start someday." The boy smiled, whispered a thank you, and ran off into the rain, his thin coat quickly soaked through. Isla watched him disappear down the street, then turned back to her seat. Ethan was still there, saying nothing, just watching her, as if he'd just witnessed the rarest thing in the world, kindness that asked for nothing in return. When she sat down, he smiled faintly. "You still find ways to surprise me." "It's not because I'm good," Ela said, her voice softer now. "It's just, I know what it feels like to be left behind." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain outside blended with the slow drip of coffee from behind the counter. Ela closed her sketchbook, leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. Ethan rested his chin on his hand, watching her, and for the first time, his eyes no longer carried that sharp edge of control, only a quiet peace he hadn't known he was missing. Outside, sunlight began to slip through the rain, a thin golden veil over the wet streets. Ela spoke almost to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe someone was right. No one truly loses everything, as long as they still know how to give. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched her as she rose, stepped outside, and lifted her hand into the rain, feeling the cold drops slide against her skin like a reminder that she was, finally, free. From the corner of the cafe, his gaze lingered on her silhouette as it disappeared into the crowd outside. The imagined camera slowly blurred, leaving only the sound of wind and one final line that echoed in his mind and across the ending frame of the video. Sometimes what shocks a millionaire the most isn't betrayal, but realizing that those who've lost everything can still choose compassion over vengeance. If you were Isla, would you forgive, or would you seek revenge to the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to the story.